The beeping of the hospital monitor became my only companion as I lay there, staring at my phone. 3 calls to my daughter, 5 to my son, 2 to my youngest. Not one answered. The doctor stood at the foot of my bed, clipboard in hand, asking, who would be taking me home after my emergency surgery? I swallowed hard and said the only truth that mattered. No one's coming. That's when I realized, after 63 years of putting everyone else first, it was finally time to rewrite my will. What happened next at our family meeting left them speechless. Sometimes the people who share your blood aren't the ones who deserve your legacy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I've always been the reliable one, the steady one, the one who shows up. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We show up. Through fevers and heartbreaks, through graduations and divorces, through every milestone and misstep, we're there, a constant in an inconstant world. That's who I was to my family. Dependable Eleanor Mason, mother of 3, grandmother of 5, widow of 7 years, and the owner of a modest but comfortable 2-story home in the suburbs of Portland that had witnessed 4 decades of Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings. The garden was my sanctuary, a tapestry of hydrangeas, lavender, and roses that bloomed in cycles, teaching me patience through the seasons of my life. My husband Thomas had built the stone pathways himself, his hands calloused from weekends, spent creating something beautiful for us. "These stones will outlast us all, Ellie," he'd said with a wink. He was right about that, as he was about so many things. That Tuesday morning in April started like any other. The spring air carried the scent of newly awakened earth as I knelt in my garden, trowel in hand, working the soil around my favorite pink hydrangeas. The grandchildren were coming this weekend, and I wanted everything perfect. Lily, my oldest granddaughter, loved helping me deadhead the spent blooms, her small fingers surprisingly gentle with the delicate petals. The dizziness came without warning. One moment I was reaching for a watering can, and the next, the world tilted sharply to the left like a ship caught in a sudden storm. My vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in like spilled ink across paper. I tried to stand, but my legs betrayed me, sending me sprawling across the mulched garden bed. My chest tightened with a pressure I'd never felt before, like someone stacking bricks one by one, each heavier than the last. "Breathe, Eleanor. Just breathe," I told myself. But each inhale became shallower than the one before. My left arm tingled strangely, a sensation that spread across my chest and up into my jaw. The symptoms clicked into place in my mind with terrible clarity. I'd read enough health pamphlets in doctors' waiting rooms to recognize what was happening. Heart attack. With trembling fingers, I fumbled for the cell phone in my gardening apron. The screen swam before my eyes as I struggled to unlock it. 3 attempts before my fingerprint registered. The emergency call connected almost immediately. A calm female voice asking my location and condition. "I think I'm having a heart attack," I managed, my own voice sounding distant, as though coming from the bottom of a well. "I'm alone. At home." The address spilled from my lips automatically, practiced information that required no thought. The dispatcher's voice remained steady, instructing me to unlock my front door if possible, to lie flat, to stay on the high line. I dragged myself across the lawn, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through my chest. The gravel of the garden path scraped against my palms as I crawled toward the house. 8 minutes, she told me. The ambulance would arrive in 8 minutes. It felt like 8 hours as I lay on my back in the grass, watching wispy clouds drift across the April sky, wondering with detached curiosity if this view would be my last. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd always hoped to die in my garden someday, just not today, not yet, not before I'd said proper goodbyes. The ambulance's wail grew louder, slicing through the quiet morning. Neighbors emerged from houses, concern etched on their faces. Mrs. Peterson from next door rushed over in her bathrobe, her gray hair still in curlers. "Eleanor! Oh my God, Eleanor!" She knelt beside me, her hand finding mine and squeezing tight. "I've called Rachel," she said, mentioning my oldest daughter. "Left a message. She'll meet you at the hospital." I nodded, unable to tell her that Rachel probably wouldn't check that message until her lunch break. My daughter, the corporate attorney, lived by her schedule, 15-minute increments carefully allocated throughout her day. Emergencies were inconvenient disruptions, especially her mother's emergencies. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, lifting me onto a stretcher, attaching monitors, slipping an oxygen mask over my face. A young woman with kind eyes and a tight ponytail leaned close. "You're going to be okay, ma'am. We're taking you to Providence, Portland. Is there someone who can meet you there?" "My children," I said through the mask, the words sounding muffled and distant. "I'll call my children." The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of sirens and medical terminology. The pain had subsided somewhat, dulled by whatever medication they'd administered through the IV now protruding from my arm. My thoughts drifted to my children, wondering which one might reach the hospital first. Rachel, my oldest at 42, worked at a prestigious law firm downtown, always impeccably dressed in tailored suits that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She had 2 children, Lily, age 10, and James, age 8, who I watched every other weekend while she and her husband Jason attended charity galas or wine tastings in the valley. David, my middle child at 39, lived across town with his wife Melissa and their 3 boys under the age of 7, a chaotic household that ran on schedules as tightly managed as military operations. He worked in finance, something with investments that he'd tried to explain during our monthly dinners. His attention split between his plate and the constant buzz of emails on his phone. And then there was Kate, my youngest at 35, single and living in Seattle, pursuing a career in tech that kept her too busy to visit more than twice a year, though she called more regularly than her siblings. Sweet Kate, who sent flowers on my birthday but couldn't quite remember if I preferred lilies or daisies. The emergency room engulfed me in controlled chaos, curtained cubicles, beeping monitors, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum floors. A doctor with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes introduced himself, though his name immediately slipped from my grasp. "Mrs. Mason, we're going to run some tests. The symptoms suggest a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, but we need to confirm. Blood draws, EKG, a chest X-ray, each test punctuated by the same question. Is someone coming to be with you?" And each time, my answer grew less certain. "My children are on their way," I said at first. Then, "My children have been notified." And finally, simply, "I've left messages." Between tests, I tried calling each of them. Rachel's phone went straight to voicemail. "This is Rachel Mason Brooks. I'm currently unavailable. If this is regarding the Westlake case, please contact my assistant." I left what I hoped sounded like a calm message, explaining I was in the emergency room, but everything is under control. No need to panic her during her workday. David's phone rang 4 times before connecting to his voicemail. "You've reached David Mason. Leave your details and I'll get back to you as priorities permit." Priorities. Such a telling word. I left a similar message for him, adding that perhaps he could let his siblings know. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Kate's phone actually rang, giving me a moment of hope before I heard her cheerful, outgoing message. I left a more detailed message for her, mentioning the words heart attack and Providence, Portland, clearly. She was the most likely to respond, quickly, unencumbered by children or court appearances. Hours passed in the strange timelessness of hospitals. Afternoon light slanted through blinds, then faded into evening shadows. A nurse with curly red hair and a name tag reading Shannon checked my monitors regularly. During her fourth visit, she hesitated before adjusting my IV. "Mrs. Mason, is there anyone else we can call for you? A neighbor, perhaps? Or a friend from church?" The question carried the gentle weight of concern, the unspoken acknowledgement that my children hadn't arrived or called. I felt a flush of embarrassment warm my cheeks. My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, might come. She's elderly herself, though. Shannon nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "What about a church group or community organization?" I almost laughed. I'd spent the past 4 decades volunteering at the community center, organizing food drives, teaching English as a second language classes, serving on the library board. I'd helped countless people over the years, driven neighbors to medical appointments, delivered casseroles during illnesses, sent handwritten cards for every occasion. The irony of lying alone in a hospital room wasn't lost on me. "I suppose you could try Diane Matthews from my book club," I finally suggested, the admission feeling like surrender. I recited her number from memory, one of the few I still knew by heart in this age of digital contacts. Shannon wrote it down with a reassuring smile. "Family can be complicated," she said, a simple statement that somehow acknowledged the elephant in the room without judgment. "They're very busy," I replied automatically, the excuse worn smooth from years of repetition. "Important jobs, children of their own." She patted my hand gently, her eyes conveying what her professional boundaries wouldn't allow her to say. That being busy wasn't an adequate excuse for absence, not in times like these. The doctor returned with results as the hospital cafeteria was serving dinner, a tray of bland chicken, overcooked vegetables, and red Jell-O that wobbled accusingly under the fluorescent lights. "Well, Mrs. Mason, the good news is you didn't have a major heart attack. You experienced what we call a minor coronary event, essentially a warning sign. Your arteries show some blockage that we'll need to address." He explained the plan: medication tonight, an angiogram in the morning to determine whether stents would be necessary, followed by a few days of observation. "It's fortunate you called the ambulance so quickly. Many people, especially women, ignore these symptoms until it's too late." I nodded, remembering Thomas and how he'd dismissed his own chest pain as indigestion until it was too late for any intervention. He'd died in his recliner, the evening newspaper still open on his lap, while I was at the grocery store buying antacids he would never take. "Is your family on their way?" the doctor asked, glancing at the empty chairs beside my bed. "We'll need to discuss your care plan with them." "They'll be here," I said with more confidence than I felt. "If not tonight, then tomorrow for sure." He nodded, making a note in my chart. "In the meantime, try to rest. The angiogram is scheduled for 9 a.m. After he left, I picked at the hospital dinner without enthusiasm, the food tasteless in my dry mouth. My phone remained silent on the bedside table. I checked it periodically, convinced I'd missed a notification, but the screen showed nothing but the time and a photo of my grandchildren as the background. As evening stretched into night, a different nurse brought medication and adjusted my pillows. "Your friend Diane called the nurses' station," she informed me. "She sends her love and will visit tomorrow after your procedure. She's arranging some meals to be delivered to your home for when you're discharged." A lump formed in my throat. Diane and I had known each other for just 3 years, meeting in a book club at the library. We weren't especially close. We discussed literature and occasionally shared rides to meetings. Yet here she was, organizing meals while my own children remained silent. I dozed fitfully, waking to the hospital's nocturnal symphony. Distant conversations, the squeak of carts, the gentle beep of monitors. Each time consciousness found me, I reached for my phone, hoping for a missed call or text. By 2 a.m., reality settled around me like a heavy blanket. No one was coming tonight. A text from Rachel finally arrived at 6:27 a.m. Just saw your message. In court all day. Jason has the kids. Keep us posted. No question about my condition. No mention of visiting. David texted at 7:15 a.m. Mom, sorry to hear you're in hospital. Crazy week at work and Melissa's mother is visiting. Call if you need anything specific. As though a heart attack were a minor inconvenience requiring perhaps a grocery delivery or a light bulb changed. Kate called at 8:03 a.m., just as they were preparing to take me for the angiogram. I heard the genuine concern in her voice, the first real warmth I'd felt since this ordeal began. Mom, I just got your message. I had my phone off during a presentation yesterday. I'm so sorry. I can try to catch a flight down this evening. Don't worry, sweetheart, I said automatically, years of motherly reassurance kicking in. They say it was just a warning, not a full attack. Save your money. I'll be fine. Are Rachel and David with you? She asked. I hesitated, unwilling to lie but equally unwilling to place blame. They know I'm here. They're very busy. Kate's silence spoke volumes. That's not what I asked, Mom. Before I could respond, the transport team arrived to take me to the cardiac catheterization lab. I have to go, Kate. They're taking me for the procedure now. I'm booking a flight, she said firmly. I'll be there tonight. The angiogram revealed 2 partially blocked arteries, not severe enough for immediate, stenting but concerning enough to warrant aggressive medication and lifestyle changes. The cardiologist, a woman about Rachel's age with an authoritative manner softened by kind eyes, explained the findings as I recovered in a curtained bay. You'll need to take these medications faithfully, she emphasized, handing me a printed sheet with intimidating pharmaceutical names. And we'll need to discuss cardiac rehabilitation, diet changes, stress management. I understand, I said, though the information felt overwhelming. In the past, Thomas would have sat beside me, taking notes, asking questions, squeezing my hand reassuringly. His absence, even 7 years later, yawned like a physical space beside me. Is someone taking you home tomorrow? The cardiologist asked, echoing the question that had followed me throughout this hospital stay. You shouldn't be alone for the first 48 hours after discharge. My daughter is flying in from Seattle, I said, clinging to Kate's promise like a lifeline. The cardiologist nodded, satisfied. Good. She should come to the discharge meeting tomorrow morning so we can review your care instructions. As afternoon crept toward evening, no one had visited except Diane, who arrived with a potted orchid and a stack of magazines. She sat with me for an hour, her company a balm to my increasingly raw feelings. Eleanor, I've called the ladies from book club, she informed me. We've set up a schedule. Someone will check on you daily for the next 2 weeks. Tears pricked my eyes at this kindness from people who owed me nothing. That's not necessary, I protested weakly. Necessary? Maybe not. But it's what friends do. Diane patted my hand. You've done the same for half the neighborhood over the years. Let us return the favor. After she left, I lay in the gathering darkness, my thoughts circling like birds unable to land. Thomas had left everything to me. Our home paid off by his life insurance, a modest retirement account, some stocks that had performed reasonably well. We'd always assumed our children would inherit eventually, the standard progression of generational wealth. But something had shifted in me during these lonely hospital hours. A realization, cold and clear as morning frost. I had become an obligation to my children, a task to be managed rather than a person to be loved. The thought settled in my chest with a weight heavier than any heart condition. Kate arrived at 8:45 p.m., bursting into my room with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her curly hair windblown, eyes worried behind her tortoiseshell glasses. Mom! She rushed to my bedside, embracing me as though I might disappear. I came as soon as I could. The relief of her presence unleashed the tears I'd been suppressing all day. "You didn't have to come," I said, even as I clutched her hand tightly. "Of course I did." She pulled back, studying my face. "You had a heart attack, Mom. Where else would I be?" "Minor coronary event," I corrected automatically. "Not a full heart attack." Kate rolled her eyes, a gesture so familiar it almost made me laugh. "Always downplaying, that's your specialty." She glanced around the empty room. "Rachel and David haven't been by at all?" I hesitated, the lifelong habit of making excuses for my children warring with the new clarity that had emerged during my hospital stay. "They're busy," I said finally, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Kate's expression hardened, slightly. "Too busy for this? Really?" She shook her head. "I called them both from the airport. Rachel said she'd try to stop by tomorrow between meetings. David said he'd come after he drops the boys at soccer." Something must have shown on my face, because Kate's tone softened. "Hey, don't worry about them right now. Let's focus on you. Tell me what the doctors said." As I recounted the medical details, I felt a decision crystallizing within me, one that had been forming unconsciously as I'd lain alone watching the hospital clock tick. Away the hours. By the time Kate left for my house with a set of keys and instructions to feed my cat Jasper, my mind was made up. In the quiet of the hospital night, I composed an email to my attorney, Martin Goldsmith, who had handled Thomas's will and our estate planning. The message was brief but resolute. "Martin, I need to make significant changes to my will and estate plan. Please schedule an appointment for next week. This is urgent. Eleanor Mason." His response arrived within minutes despite the late hour. "Eleanor, sorry to hear you're in the hospital. Kate called me. Don't worry about anything right now except getting better. I'll come to you tomorrow afternoon. We can discuss whatever changes you're considering." I placed my phone on the nightstand and settled back against the pillows, feeling lighter than I had in days, despite the gravity of my decision. Sometimes it takes a heart event to make you see clearly where you stand in the hearts of others. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is setting boundaries that should have been established long ago. Tomorrow, I would begin redrawing the map of my relationships. Tomorrow, I would stop making excuses for absence and start honoring presence. Tomorrow, I would acknowledge what my heart had been trying to tell me even before it faltered. That family isn't defined by obligation or blood, but by who shows up when the call goes out. As sleep finally claimed me, I thought of Thomas's favorite saying, one he'd repeated throughout our 40 years together. "Pay attention to patterns, Ellie. People tell you who they are, not with their words, but with their actions." After all these years, I was finally listening. Martin Goldsmith arrived at my hospital room precisely at 2 p.m, just as he'd promised. He looked exactly as an attorney of 40 years' practice should, silver-haired, meticulous in his navy suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase that had likely witnessed thousands of life-altering decisions. His eyes, though, held something beyond professional courtesy, genuine concern that softened his otherwise formal demeanor. "Eleanor," he said, taking my hand between both of his, "you gave us all quite a scare. How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday," I admitted. "Though, that's not saying much." He settled into the visitor's chair beside my bed, the plastic squeaking under his weight. "Kate filled me in a bit. Minor coronary event, they're calling it?" I nodded, adjusting myself against the pillows. "A warning shot across the bow, according to the cardiologist. 2 partially blocked arteries, medication for now, possible stents later if things don't improve." Martin nodded, his expression somber. "And where are Rachel and David? I expected them to be hovering over you like concerned hawks." The question, though gently asked, pierced something tender within me. "They haven't been here," I said simply, deciding in that moment to stop making excuses for them. Rachel is in court. David is dealing with his mother-in-law's visit. They're both very busy. Martin's eyebrows rose slightly, but he made no comment. Instead, he unlatched his briefcase, withdrawing a leather portfolio. You mentioned wanting to make changes to your will and estate plan. Significant changes, you said. I assume this health scare has prompted some reflection? You could say that. I smoothed the thin hospital blanket across my lap, gathering my thoughts. When you're lying in a hospital bed wondering if you're going to die, and none of your children bother to show up, it certainly clarifies things. He didn't seem surprised by my bluntness. Martin had known our family for decades, had drafted the wills for both Thomas and me, had handled the probate after Thomas passed. He'd witnessed the gradual shift in family dynamics over the years, the increasing absence of my children as their lives grew busier, more important, more removed from mine. What changes are you considering? He asked, his tone neutral, professional. I took a deep breath. I want to completely restructure my estate plan. The current will leaves everything equally to my 3 children. I want to change that. Martin uncapped his pen. I'm listening. I want 20% divided equally among the 5 grandchildren, held in trust for their education. Another 30% to Kate, who despite living farthest away has shown more concern than the other 2 combined. I paused, measuring my next words carefully. 20% to the community support network that's been helping seniors in Portland for the past decade. I've been volunteering with them since Thomas died. Martin wrote steadily, nodding. That leaves 30%. Yes. I looked out the window at the afternoon sky, a pale blue etched with high, thin clouds. The remaining 30% should go to Diane Matthews and the other members of my book club to be used specifically for their Readers Reaching Out program. They deliver books to homebound seniors and host community discussions. It's been a lifeline for many people, including me, after Thomas passed. Martin's pen stilled. Eleanor, these are indeed significant changes. Are you certain you want to reduce Rachel and David's inheritance this dramatically? They're currently positioned to receive a third each, and this would leave them with nothing. The reality of my decision hung in the air between us. Was I being vindictive? Overreacting to their absence during this crisis? I considered this possibility seriously, examining my conscience for any hint of petty revenge. I'm not doing this to punish them, I said finally. I'm doing this because resources should go where they'll do the most good. Rachel makes more in a month than I lived on for a year. David's house is twice the size of mine. They don't need my money. They've made that abundantly clear by their choices. What they might need is a realization that relationships require presence, not just periodic attention when convenient. Martin studied me for a long moment, then nodded. I understand. And legally, it's entirely your prerogative. You're of sound mind, this hospitalization notwithstanding. And these assets are yours to distribute as you see fit. He made a few more notes. I'll draft the revisions immediately. However, I'd suggest waiting until you're recovered before signing. Gives you time to reflect. Ensures no one could claim you made decisions under duress or medication. That's reasonable, I agreed. But I want the drafts complete as soon as possible. This experience has reminded me how quickly things can change. Of course. He closed his portfolio. Now, shall I tell Rachel and David about these changes, or would you prefer to do that yourself? I considered this. I think a family meeting, once I'm discharged, would be best. All 3 children present. Martin's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught the slight lift of his eyebrow. That should be interesting. Indeed, I said, feeling strangely calm about the confrontation to come. I think it's time for some honesty in this family. As Martin prepared to leave, a soft knock at the door drew our attention. Kate entered, carrying a canvas tote bag and looking slightly frazzled. Her curly hair had been hastily pulled into a bun, and she'd clearly come straight from the airport, still wearing the wrinkled clothes she'd traveled in. "Mom, sorry I'm late." She hurried to my bedside, kissing my cheek before noticing Martin. "Oh, Mr. Goldsmith, hello." "Kate, good to see you." Martin stood, extending his hand. "I was just leaving. Your mother and I have been discussing some business matters." Kate's glance darted between us. "Business matters? Mom, should you be worrying about that right now?" "It's precisely the right time," I replied, reaching for her hand. Nothing like a brush with mortality to clarify priorities. After Martin left, promising to be in touch with the draft documents within days, Kate settled into the chair he'd vacated. "What business matters, Mom? Is everything okay financially?" "Everything's fine," I assured her. "Just updating some legal arrangements. Nothing for you to worry about." I changed the subject. "Have you heard from your brother or sister?" Kate's expression tightened slightly. "I texted them both. Rachel said she might stop by tomorrow morning before court. David said he'd try to come this evening, but Melissa's mother is apparently making her special lasagna, so—" She let the sentence trail off, the implication clear. "His mother-in-law's lasagna takes precedence over his mother's heart attack," I observed, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Mom, that's not fair. It's not a major heart attack, remember? Just a warning sign." Kate repeated my own dismissive words back to me, though her tone suggested she didn't believe them any more than I did. "You're right," I conceded. "Not fair at all. You flew down from Seattle on a moment's notice. They live 20 minutes away and can't find time to visit. Totally different situations." Kate sighed, squeezing my hand. "They've always been like this, Mom. You know that. Rachel with her career, David with his perfect family routine. They love you, they're just busy," I finished for her. "Yes, I know. They've been busy for about 15 years now." The truth of this statement hung between us. Kate didn't argue. She couldn't. Not when the evidence was so plainly before us in the form of an empty hospital room that should have been filled with concerned family. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Kate unpacked things from my house, my own nightgown, toiletries, a paperback novel I'd been reading. Small comforts that made the sterile hospital room feel marginally more personal. We chatted about her work in Seattle, about her girlfriend Julia, whom I'd yet to meet, about the neighborhood book club that had become such an important part of my life. David arrived at 7:38 p.m., just as visiting hours were ending. He appeared in the doorway looking harried, his tie loosened, his expression a carefully constructed mix of concern and apology. "Mom," he said, stepping forward to kiss my cheek. "Sorry I couldn't get here sooner. Absolute chaos at work, and then Melissa's mother made her special lasagna." I finished for him. "Yes," Kate mentioned. "How was it?" He blinked, momentarily, thrown by my directness. "Good. Fine. But that's not important." "How are you feeling?" Kate said it wasn't a major event. "Minor coronary event," I confirmed. "Though still a heart attack, technically speaking." He nodded, standing awkwardly at my bedside, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Do they know when you'll be discharged?" "Tomorrow morning, if all goes well overnight," Kate answered when I didn't immediately respond. "Great. That's great." David checked his watch. "Listen, Mom, I can't stay long. The boys have school tomorrow, and I promised I'd be back to do bedtime stories. But I wanted to check in personally. Is there anything you need? Anything I can help with?" Kate shot me a look, silently encouraging me to ask for what I needed. I considered it. Considered asking him to drive me home tomorrow, to stay with me for a day or two, to be the son I remembered from before career and family had consumed his attention. Instead, I simply said, "Actually, yes. There will be a family meeting at my house this Sunday at 3 o'clock. I need you to be there." He frowned slightly. This Sunday? I'm not sure if I can. The boys have soccer, and Melissa's planning. David, I interrupted, my voice firm. This is important. I'm not asking. Something in my tone must have registered because he straightened slightly, eyes widening. Is everything okay? Is this about your health? It's about our family, I replied, and I expect you to be there. Soccer and Melissa's plans notwithstanding. He looked startled, then nodded slowly. Okay, Sunday at 3, I'll be there. After David left, Kate turned to me with raised eyebrows. Well, that was different. You never pull rank like that. Perhaps I should have started years ago, I said, suddenly tired. The day's emotions had drained me more than I'd realized. Kate helped me settle for the night, adjusting pillows and making sure my water was within reach. As she prepared to leave for my house, where she'd be staying, she hesitated at the door. Mom, what's this family meeting really about? Is there something you're not telling me? I met her worried gaze steadily. It's about consequences, Kate. Long overdue consequences. The next morning brought Rachel, arriving at precisely 8:15 a.m., dressed for court in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She entered with an air of efficiency, as if my hospital room were simply another appointment on her calendar. Mom, she greeted, leaning down to brush her lips against my cheek. Her perfume, something expensive and subtle, momentarily overwhelmed the antiseptic hospital smell. You're looking better than I expected. Kate said it was just a minor event? That's what they're calling it, I confirmed, noting that she hadn't bothered to ask any medical staff directly. Rachel nodded, standing at my bedside rather than taking a seat. Good. Listen, I have court at 9:30, but I wanted to check in. Do you need anything? Money for medical expenses? I can transfer some funds. No, I interrupted. The insurance is covering most of it. What I need is for you to attend a family meeting at my house this Sunday at 3. She immediately pulled out her phone, frowning as she checked her calendar. Sunday? I don't think... Wait, is this about estate planning? David texted that he saw Martin Goldsmith here yesterday. Of course, that detail would be what caught her attention. Yes, Martin was here, and yes, we're going to discuss some changes to my estate planning, among other things. Rachel's expression sharpened with sudden interest. Changes? What kind of changes? That's what the meeting is for, I replied, unwilling to get into details while attached to hospital monitors. She studied me for a moment, something calculating in her gaze. Mom, you shouldn't be making major financial decisions right after a health crisis. It's not the right time for clear thinking. The condescension in her tone sent a flash of irritation through me. My thinking is perfectly clear, Rachel. Clearer than it's been in years, actually. Sunday at 3. I expect you to be there. She looked like she wanted to argue, but a quick glance at her watch apparently reminded her of her schedule. Fine, I'll rearrange some things, but we should discuss this privately before you make any hasty decisions. There's nothing hasty about these decisions, I said quietly. They've been years in the making. I just didn't realize it until now. Rachel left soon after, her heels clicking purposefully down the hospital corridor, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and the impression of a duty efficiently dispatched. The discharge process took most of the morning. The cardiologist reviewed my medications, scheduled follow-up appointments, and emphasized the importance of cardiac rehabilitation and stress reduction. You need support at home, she stressed. Is someone staying with you? My daughter, Kate, I confirmed, glancing at Kate, who stood nearby, nodding firmly. Good. No living alone for at least the first week. No driving for 5 days. No lifting anything heavier than 5 pounds. The doctor handed me a sheaf of papers. All the instructions are here. Follow them religiously. By noon, I was seated in a wheelchair at the hospital entrance, Kate pulling her rental car around to the pickup zone. The April air felt remarkably fresh after the recycled atmosphere of the hospital. I breathed deeply, feeling the slight twinge in my chest that served as a reminder of my new reality. "Ready to go home?" Kate asked, helping me into the passenger seat. "More than ready," I confirmed. The drive through Portland was quiet, both of us lost in thought. As we turned onto my street, I noticed a small group gathered on my front porch. Diane from book club, Mrs. Peterson from next door, and 2 other neighbors, all holding covered dishes and wearing expressions of concern. "Your welcoming committee," Kate observed with a small smile. "Looks like you've got a better support system than I realized." The observation struck me as profoundly true. In the years since Thomas's death, I'd gradually built a community around me, not family by blood, but people who showed up, who checked in, who remembered the little details of my life. People who, when they heard I was ill, didn't message that they were too busy. They simply appeared, casseroles in hand. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery, medication schedules, and visits from neighbors and book club friends. Kate worked remotely from my dining room table, taking breaks to make tea or help me move from sofa to garden chair. Rachel called once to confirm she would attend Sunday's meeting. David texted to ask if he could bring Melissa, to which I replied a firm, "No, just the 3 of you." By Sunday morning, I felt stronger than I had all week. The initial shock of the heart event had faded, replaced by a new determination that strengthened with each passing day. I asked Kate to help me prepare the living room, arranging the armchairs and sofa to face my reading chair, the one Thomas had given me for our 30th anniversary. "This looks like a tribunal," Kate observed, fluffing a cushion. "Are you sure you want to do this today? It's only been 5 days since the hospital." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "My mind is made up, and postponing will only make it harder." Martin arrived 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting time, carrying his briefcase and a folder of documents. "Everything is prepared as you requested, Eleanor," he said after settling at the dining room table. "Are you still certain about these changes?" "Absolutely certain," I confirmed, signing where he indicated. The experiences of this week have only reinforced my decision. Kate hovered nearby, curiosity evident in her expression. "Mom, are you going to tell me what this is all about before Rachel and David arrive?" I considered this, then nodded. "You should know what's coming. Sit down, Kate." As Martin and I explained the changes to my will and estate plan, Kate's expression shifted from surprise to understanding to concern. "Mom, are you sure? Rachel and David will be devastated and furious." "I'm counting on it," I replied. "Sometimes people need a shock to recognize the consequences of their choices." At precisely 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Kate went to answer it, returning moments later with Rachel and David in tow. Rachel, dressed casually but expensively in slacks and a silk blouse, immediately noticed Martin at the dining room table. "Mr. Goldsmith," she said, her lawyer's instincts clearly triggered. "I didn't realize this was a formal legal meeting." "Hello, Rachel, David," Martin greeted them with professional courtesy. "Why don't we all sit down? Eleanor has some matters she'd like to discuss." The atmosphere tensed perceptibly as we moved to the living room. I took my reading chair while my 3 children arranged themselves on the sofa opposite me. Martin sat slightly to the side, folder open on his lap. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steadier than I'd anticipated. "As you know, I had a health scare this week, what the doctors call a minor coronary event. It could have been much worse. I could have died alone in my garden." Rachel shifted uncomfortably. David studied his hands. Only Kate met my gaze directly. "This experience has forced me to reevaluate many things," I continued, "including my relationship with each of you and how I want to structure my estate." Rachel straightened, her attention sharpening. David glanced up, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "For years, I've made excuses for your absence in my life. You're busy with work, busy with children, busy with your own concerns. I told myself that was natural, part of growing older, part of children becoming independent. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But this week showed me the truth. When I needed you most, when I was literally in a life-threatening situation, you couldn't be bothered to show up. "Mom," Rachel began, her tone placating, "that's not fair. We all have responsibilities." "Kate has responsibilities too," I interrupted, gesturing to my youngest. "She has a demanding job, a life in Seattle, yet she was on a plane within hours of hearing I was ill. She's been here all week, working remotely, taking care of me, rearranging her entire life because someone she loves needed her." David cleared his throat. "Mom, we care about you. Of course we do. But Kate doesn't have children. She doesn't have the same—" "Stop," I said firmly. "No more excuses. This isn't about who has the most legitimate reasons for absence. It's about choices. You both chose repeatedly not to be present in my life in any meaningful way, and now I'm choosing to acknowledge that reality." I nodded to Martin, who handed each of them a document. "This is my new will and estate plan, which I've just signed with Mr. Goldsmith as witness. You'll find that I've made significant changes to the distribution of my assets." Rachel scanned the document quickly, her legal training allowing her to absorb the key points at a glance. Her face paled, then flushed with anger. "Mom, this can't be serious. You're cutting us out completely? Giving everything to Kate and a book club? This is completely legal and binding," Martin supplied quietly. "Eleanor is of sound mind, and these decisions are entirely within her rights." David looked up from his copy, confusion evident in his expression. "I don't understand. Why would you do this? Is this some kind of punishment?" "It's not punishment, David. It's consequence." I leaned forward slightly. "For years, I've given to you both. Time, love, babysitting, financial help when needed. I've been available whenever you called, which was increasingly rare. I made excuses for missed birthdays, abbreviated holiday visits, the fact that neither of you has spent more than 2 consecutive hours in my company in the past year." I paused, letting that sink in. "But this week, when I needed you, when I was alone and afraid and literally facing my mortality, you couldn't even bother to show up. Rachel, you sent a text. David, you stopped by for exactly 12 minutes because your mother-in-law's lasagna couldn't wait. And that told me everything I needed to know about where I stand in your priorities." The room fell silent. Rachel's expression had hardened into something flinty and defensive. David looked stricken, his gaze shifting between the document and my face. "So yes, I've changed my will. Kate will receive 30% of my estate because she has demonstrated genuine care and presence in my life. My grandchildren will receive 20% in education trusts because they're innocent in this situation and I want to support their futures. The rest will go to organizations and people who have actually shown up for me since your father died, who check in, who remember the little details, who prioritize relationship over convenience." Rachel stood abruptly, the document crumpling in her clenched fist. "This is ridiculous. You're clearly not thinking clearly. You've just had a heart attack. You're emotional, vulnerable. We can contest this." Martin cleared his throat. "I can assure you, Rachel, that your mother has been fully evaluated by medical professionals and is of completely sound mind. And as you well know, being emotional about one's children's behavior is not grounds for invalidating a will." David remained seated, his expression troubled. "Mom, I don't care about the money. I care that you think we don't love you. That's not true. Love isn't just a feeling, David. It's not something you claim while acting contrary to it. Love is attention. It's presence. It's showing up when needed." I felt tears threatening, but blinked them back. Actions speak louder than words. Your father used to say that all the time. Your actions have been speaking very clearly for years. I've just finally started listening. Kate, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. She's right. You two have been absent for years. I've watched it happen from Seattle, calling Mom twice a week while you two live across town and can't be bothered to visit unless you need something. Rachel turned on her sister. Of course. You're defending her. You're getting a third of everything. How convenient that you show up for one crisis and suddenly you're the perfect daughter. I didn't know anything about the will until an hour ago, Kate shot back. And I've been showing up from 3 states away while you can't manage it, from 20 minutes across town. The argument escalated, voices rising as years of unspoken tension found release. I watched, a strange calm settling over me. This confrontation was long overdue. Painful, yes, but necessary. Sometimes healing can only begin after lancing the wound. Finally, I raised my hand. Enough. This isn't productive. The decision is made. The documents are signed. What happens now is up to you. Rachel gathered her purse, her movements sharp with anger. This isn't over, Mom. I can't believe you would do this to us, to your own children. When you come to your senses, call me. She stormed out, the front door slamming behind her. David remained seated, his expression troubled. Mom, please. This feels so extreme. We've made mistakes, been too busy. I see that now. But to change everything this way. It's not about the money, David, I said gently. It's about recognizing the relationships as they actually exist, not as we pretend they do. If you want things to be different, then be different. Show up, be present. Demonstrate that I matter in your life beyond what I can give you. He nodded, slowly, uncertainty evident in his expression. What would that look like? What do you need from me? The question, so simple, so fundamental, caught me off guard. When was the last time either of my older children had actually asked what I needed? Regular visits, not rushed, not distracted. Bringing the boys over not just when you need babysitting, but because they should know their grandmother. Calling to check in, not just when you need something. Including me in your life in meaningful ways, not as an afterthought. I reached for his hand. Being a son, David. That's all I've ever wanted. He squeezed my hand, nodding again, his eyes suspiciously bright. I can do better. I want to do better. Then do, I said simply. The will can always be amended if relationships change, but it has to be real change, not temporary guilt-driven attention that fades as soon as life gets busy again. After David left, promising to call tomorrow, Kate and Martin exchanged glances. Well, Martin said, gathering his papers, that went about as expected. Rachel will try to contest, Kate predicted. She can try, Martin replied. But she won't succeed. Your mother's reasoning is sound, her mental capacity unquestionable, and her decisions legally binding. He patted my shoulder gently. Get some rest, Eleanor. That was a lot of emotional exertion for someone just out of the hospital. After Martin left, Kate brought me tea, settling beside me on the sofa. Are you okay? I considered the question, taking stock of my feelings. The lingering hurt, yes, but also a surprising sense of lightness, of boundaries finally established. I think I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm standing up for myself. Rachel won't forgive easily, Kate warned. She hates being confronted with her own behavior. I know. I sipped my tea, watching the afternoon light filter through the living room curtains. But I didn't do this to win her approval. I did it because it was truthful, and after 63 years of putting everyone else first, it was time for some honesty. We sat in companionable silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, Kate spoke again. What about David? Do you think he'll really change? I don't know, I admitted. People can change if they want to badly enough. The question is whether his comfort with the status quo is stronger than his desire for a real relationship. As evening fell, neighbors began arriving with more food. A casserole from Mrs. Peterson, homemade bread from the couple across the street, a fruit basket from my book club friends. They filed through the kitchen, offering hugs, checking how I was feeling, making plans for who would drive me to cardiac rehabilitation next week. Watching them, I felt a profound realization settle over me. Family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's created through consistent care, through small kindnesses accumulated over time, through the simple act of showing up when needed. The heart attack hadn't just been a medical crisis. It had been a moment of clarity, forcing me to see what I'd been avoiding for years. My children's absence hadn't started with my hospitalization. It had merely been illuminated by it, thrown into sharp relief against the backdrop of others' genuine concern. As I prepared for bed that night, Kate helping me sort my evening medications, I caught sight of Thomas's photograph on my nightstand. His kind eyes seemed to hold a hint of approval, as if to say, "It's about time, Ellie." "You know," I said to Kate as she fluffed my pillows, "your father used to say that at the end of life, people rarely regret working too little or saving too much money. They regret the relationships they neglected, the connections they failed to nurture." Kate smiled, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Sounds like Dad. He was right about so many things." I settled against the pillows, suddenly tired but content. "I think he would approve of today." "I think so too," Kate agreed, leaning down to kiss my forehead. "Get some rest, Mom. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything." As she turned out the light and softly closed the door, I felt an unexpected peace settle over me. The confrontation had been painful, yes, but necessary, like lancing a wound that had been festering for too long. Whatever happened next, whether Rachel remained angry, whether David truly changed, whether my relationships with my older children healed or further fractured, I had finally spoken my truth. After decades of accommodating, excusing, and enabling, I had drawn a line and declared my worth. Sometimes I reflected as sleep began to claim me. The greatest act of love isn't giving everything away. Sometimes it's establishing boundaries that teach others how to truly value what they've been taking for granted. And sometimes, facing mortality gives you the courage to finally live truthfully, without apology or excuse. The minor coronary event, as the doctors called it, hadn't just been a warning about my physical heart. It had been a wake-up call about the matters of the heart that truly count, the relationships that sustain us, the connections that give life meaning, and the courage to finally acknowledge reality, however painful that acknowledgement might be. 3 days after the family meeting, I sat in my garden, enjoying the late morning sunshine. The hydrangeas were beginning to form small green buds, promising summer blooms in shades of blue and purple. My cat Jasper lounged nearby, his tabby coat gleaming in a patch of sunlight, occasionally opening one eye to check on my movements. This garden had always been my sanctuary, but now it felt different, both the site of my collapse and a symbol of my rebirth. The soil beneath my fingers connected me to something enduring, something that existed beyond the complications of family dynamics and hurt feelings. Kate had extended her stay through the end of the week, working remotely from my dining room and driving me to doctor appointments. Her presence was unobtrusive yet constant, a quiet support that asked nothing in return. That morning, she'd brought me tea in my favorite mug, the one Thomas had given me on our 35th anniversary, decorated with impressionist water lilies. "Diane called," Kate mentioned, settling into the garden chair beside me. "She's organizing some kind of schedule with your book club friends. They want to make sure someone checks on you daily after I go back to Seattle." I nodded, not surprised. Diane's good at organizing people. She used to be an event planner before retirement. You have more support than I realized, Kate observed, stirring honey into her own tea. I've been worried about you being alone out here, but you've built quite a community. Not entirely by design, I admitted. After your father died, I realized how isolated we'd become. We were so focused on each other, on you children, on work. When he was gone, I had to reinvent everything. I glanced at the stone pathway he'd built, still solid after all these years. The book club was my first step, then volunteering at the community center, small connections that grew over time. Kate nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about moving back to Portland. The statement caught me off guard. Because of my health? Kate, you don't need to uproot your life for me. Not just for you, she said, though her expression suggested that was certainly part of it. Julia and I have been talking about it for months. She can transfer to her company's Portland office, and I can work remotely permanently. Seattle's gotten so expensive, and honestly, she hesitated. I miss being closer to family, to you, specifically. The admission warmed something deep within me. I'd love having you nearby, but only if it's what you truly want. I didn't change my will to manipulate any of you into different choices. I know that, Kate assured me. This isn't about the will. It's about watching you go through this crisis mostly alone and realizing I don't want that distance anymore. Life's too short and unpredictable. We sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea and watching a hummingbird dart among the early spring blossoms. The moment felt precious. Connection without agenda, presence without expectation. If nothing else came from my heart episode, this deepening of relationship with Kate was worth every moment of pain. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. Kate glanced toward the front of the house. Are you expecting someone? No, I replied, though a suspicion formed immediately. The timing was too coincidental. Kate rose, setting her teacup on the garden table. I'll see who it is. I listened as the gate creaked open, followed by the murmur of voices. Kate's, surprised but polite, and another, more insistent. Rachel. Of course it would be Rachel, who never could leave a confrontation unfinished. They appeared around the corner of the house moments later. Rachel looked immaculate as always, dressed in tailored slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire gardening wardrobe. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of concern, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed her true mood. "Mom," she greeted, her gaze taking in my gardening clothes and dirt-smudged hands. "Should you be out here exerting yourself so soon after a heart attack?" "Minor coronary event," I corrected mildly. "And gardening is actually recommended. Gentle activity, fresh air, stress reduction." I gestured to the empty chair. "Would you like to join us? Kate just made tea." Rachel hesitated, then perched on the edge of the garden chair as if afraid the casual outdoor furniture might somehow contaminate her expensive clothing. "I don't need tea. I need to understand what happened on Sunday." Kate shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe I should give you two some privacy." "Stay," Rachel and I said simultaneously, though for entirely different reasons. I wanted Kate's support. Rachel, I suspected, wanted a witness to whatever she had come to say. "Rachel," I began, setting aside my gardening trowel. "I thought I was quite clear on Sunday. The changes to my will reflect the reality of our relationships as they currently exist. Not as I wish they were, not as you might claim they are, but as they actually are in practice." "This isn't about the money," Rachel insisted, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's about family loyalty, about values, about what Dad would have wanted." I couldn't help but laugh, a short, surprised sound that escaped before I could contain it. "Your father would have been appalled by how you and David have treated me these past years. Thomas believed that actions speak louder than words. He valued presence above all else." Rachel's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. That's completely unfair. I have a career, children, responsibilities. So does nearly every adult on the planet, I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness. Those aren't excuses for neglecting relationships that matter. They're choices about priorities. And you've decided to punish me for those choices, Rachel shot back. To disinherit your own daughter because she has a demanding job. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that anger would only inflame the situation. Rachel, look around you. This garden, this house, they're merely things. What matters is who shows up, who makes time, who demonstrates through actions that a relationship is valued. I gestured toward Kate. Your sister lives 3 states away, yet she calls regularly, visits when she can, and dropped everything to be here when I needed her. So now Kate's the perfect daughter. Rachel's voice rose slightly. The golden child who can do no wrong? That's not fair either. She doesn't have children demanding her attention. She doesn't have the same responsibilities. No, she doesn't, I agreed calmly. She has different ones, and she still manages to maintain a real relationship with me, not one built on obligation or convenience. Rachel fell silent, her expression shifting between anger and something less definable, perhaps genuine hurt, perhaps uncomfortable recognition. Finally, she spoke again, her voice controlled once more. I've consulted with a colleague who specializes in contested wills. He believes there are grounds to challenge your new arrangements, given your recent health crisis and the sudden dramatic changes. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Kate made a small sound of disbelief. Rachel, are you seriously threatening to take Mom to court over this? After everything that just happened? I'm trying to protect Mom from making decisions she'll regret, Rachel replied, not looking at either of us. Decisions clearly influenced by emotional distress and medical trauma. I'm sitting right here, I reminded her quietly, and I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions, emotionally charged or otherwise. I leaned forward slightly. Rachel, listen to me. If you pursue this legally, you will not win. Martin has ensured everything is properly documented, including evaluations of my mental competence. But more importantly, you'll be proving exactly why I made these changes in the first place, because you see me as a resource to be managed or an inconvenience to be dealt with, not as a person with agency and feelings. Something in my tone must have reached her because Rachel's expression faltered. For a moment, beneath the polished exterior of the successful attorney, I glimpsed my little girl, the one who used to crawl into my lap with skinned knees, seeking comfort. The one who, somewhere along the way, had decided that achievement mattered more than connection. I don't see you that way, she said, her voice suddenly less certain. I've always tried to help with practical matters. Financial advice, legal, concerns. That's how I show care. And I appreciate that, I acknowledged. But relationships need more than practical assistance offered at a distance. They need presence, attention, time freely given without checking watches or answering emails. Rachel looked away, her gaze settling on Thomas's stone pathway. Dad always said I was too focused on achievement, that I needed to learn to be present. He was right, I said gently. And he would be the first to tell you that no amount of professional success compensates for relationships neglected. A silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves in the spring breeze. Kate remained quiet, allowing this moment between mother and daughter to unfold without interference. Finally, Rachel spoke again, her voice softer than before. What would it take to change things back? The question caught me off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because it revealed the transactional nature of Rachel's thinking. Even now, she was approaching this as a negotiation, a problem to be solved with the right concessions. That's not how this works, I explained. This isn't about meeting certain conditions to earn back an inheritance. It's about genuine connection, about rebuilding a relationship that's withered from neglect. I reached across the garden table to touch her hand, surprised when she didn't pull away. If our relationship changes, really changes, not temporarily, because of financial motivation, then yes, I might reconsider aspects of my estate plan. But that would be a natural outcome of renewed connection, not its purpose. Rachel nodded slowly, her legal mind clearly processing this distinction. And how would that look? Practically speaking, I can't quit my job or neglect my children. No one is asking you to, I assured her. But you could call regularly just to check in, visit without being prompted by a holiday or emergency. Include me in your life in meaningful ways, not as an afterthought. I smiled slightly. Basically, be a daughter, not just a legal next of kin. Something shifted in Rachel's expression, a subtle softening, a crack in the professional facade she maintained so carefully. I don't know if I remember how, she admitted quietly. Somewhere along the way, I think I forgot what that means. The vulnerability in her admission touched me deeply. We can figure it out together, I offered, if you're willing to try. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of another car pulling into the driveway. Moments later, David appeared around the corner of the house, looking slightly harried in a wrinkled button-down shirt, as if he'd left work in a hurry. "Oh," he said, taking in the scene before him. "Rachel's here too. Is this another family meeting?" "An impromptu one," Kate confirmed, rising to pull another garden chair from the shed. "Join us." David settled into the offered seat, glancing. Between Rachel and me, uncertainly. I tried calling first, but no one answered. "I wanted to see how you're doing, Mom, and to tell you I've been thinking about what you said on Sunday." Rachel shot him a look. "You're not contesting then, just accepting that Mom's cutting us out of her will?" David shook his head, surprising me. "It's not about the will, Rachel. It's about what it represents. Mom's right. We've been absent. Too busy, too distracted, too wrapped up in our own concerns." He turned to me. "I've been looking at my calendar, figuring out how to rearrange things. I'd like to bring the boys over this weekend if you're feeling up to it. Not just to visit, but to help with the garden. Maybe start teaching them about plants like you used to teach me." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and unexpectedly, tears pricked at my eyes. "I'd like that very much." Rachel looked. Between David and me, something complicated passing across her expression. "So that's it? David makes one gesture and everything's forgiven?" "Nothing's that simple," I corrected gently. "One visit doesn't erase years of absence, but it's a start, a willingness to change patterns that weren't working. The question is whether you're willing to try something similar." The challenge hung in the air between us. Rachel had always been my most stubborn child, the one who dug in her heels when confronted, who responded to perceived criticism with defensive counterattacks. But she was also the one who, once committed to a course of action, pursued it with unwavering determination. She straightened her shoulders slightly, a gesture I recognized from her childhood. Rachel preparing to accept a difficult challenge. "I could bring Lily and James for dinner next week. Maybe make it a regular thing every Wednesday. They should spend more time with you, especially after." She trailed off, unable to articulate the reality of my mortality that my health crisis had brought into sharp focus. "I'd love that," I said simply, not wanting to overreact and frighten her away from this tentative step. The tension that had pervaded the garden began to dissipate, replaced by something more complex, but infinitely more hopeful. We weren't a Hallmark movie family, instantly reconciled with tearful hugs and proclamations of undying devotion. Fractures that had developed over years would need time and consistent effort to heal. But in that moment, sitting among the early spring growth of my garden, I felt the first genuine stirrings of possibility. As the afternoon progressed, Our conversation gradually shifted from the emotionally charged territory of wills and relationships to more mundane matters: the children's activities, Kate's potential move back to Portland, the book club's upcoming discussion of a novel Rachel had actually read for a case involving publishing rights. The interaction wasn't entirely comfortable, still tinged with the awareness of Sunday's confrontation, but it felt like a tentative step towards something new. When David mentioned needing to leave to pick up his sons from soccer practice, Rachel glanced at her watch and rose as well. "I should go too. Jason's handling dinner, but he's hopeless with Lily's homework." She hesitated, then added, "I'll call tomorrow, Mom, just to check in." The commitment, small as it was, felt significant. "I'd like that," I replied simply. After they left, Kate and I remained in the garden as the afternoon light began to soften toward evening. "That was unexpected," she observed, helping me gather the garden tools. "Do you think anything will really change?" "I don't know," I admitted. Patterns are hard to break, especially long-established ones. But awareness is the first step. They can't change what they don't acknowledge. That evening, as Kate prepared a simple dinner of soup and fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery, I found myself reflecting on the day's events. The confrontation with Rachel hadn't gone as I'd expected. Neither the bitter battle I'd feared, nor the immediate reconciliation I'd secretly hoped for. Instead, it had been messy, complicated, and unresolved, much like our relationship itself. My phone chimed with a text message as we were finishing dinner. David had sent a photo of his youngest son holding up a school art project, a painted clay pot with wobbly green stems emerging from the top. The message read, "Max made this for you today. Says it's for your garden. Can we bring it over Saturday?" Such a small thing, really. A child's art project, a text message with a photo, and yet it represented something larger. David making an effort to include me in the ordinary moments of his family's life, not just the obligatory holiday gatherings or emergency situations. I showed the message to Kate, who smiled. "It's a start." "Yes," I agreed. A small one, but genuine. The next morning brought a call from Rachel, brief and slightly awkward, but a call nonetheless. She asked about my medication schedule, whether I needed anything, how I was feeling. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it was more personal attention than she'd voluntarily offered in months. Kate observed these developments with cautious optimism. "They're trying," she noted as we shared breakfast. "That's something, at least." "It is," I agreed. Though I'm not naive enough to think everything's magically fixed. "No," Kate conceded. "But awareness creates possibility. They can't change what they don't acknowledge." The phrase, "my own words from the previous day," echoed back to me, carrying new weight. Perhaps that had been the true purpose of my revised will, beyond any consideration of assets or inheritance. It had forced an acknowledgement of patterns too long ignored, creating the possibility, however fragile, of genuine change. Over the next few days, small gestures continued to accumulate. Rachel called every morning, the conversations gradually lengthening as her initial discomfort eased. David sent occasional texts, sharing mundane family moments, his middle son losing a tooth, his wife finding the camping equipment they'd thought was lost. Kate continued her gentle presence, never mentioning these developments directly, but clearly monitoring them with hopeful interest. On Friday afternoon, as Kate helped me prepare for her departure the following day, the doorbell rang. A delivery. Person stood on the porch, holding an arrangement of spring flowers, tulips, daffodils, and hyacinths in a simple blue ceramic vase. The card read, "Thinking of you. Planning to bring the kids Wednesday as promised. Rachel." Not effusive, not particularly emotional, but thoughtful, and unprompted by any special occasion or crisis. I placed the flowers on the kitchen table, their bright colors catching the afternoon sunlight. "Rachel?" Kate asked, noticing my expression. I nodded, showing her the card. Wow, Kate said simply. That's not like her at all. No, I agreed. It's not. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, the kind of spring day that seems to vibrate with possibility. Kate packed her suitcase reluctantly, having extended her stay as long as possible. I don't feel good about leaving you, she admitted as we sat at the kitchen table, sharing a last cup of tea before her departure. Are you sure you'll be okay? I'll be fine, I assured her. Diane's coming by this afternoon, Mrs. Peterson checks in every morning, and David's bringing the boys later today. I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. And you'll be back soon enough, according to your relocation plans. Kate nodded, returning the pressure of my fingers. Julia's already looking at job listings in Portland. We're thinking maybe by midsummer, if everything works out. That would be wonderful, I said sincerely. But don't rush on my account. I'm not going anywhere. You better not, she replied, her tone light, though her eyes betrayed deeper emotion. I've got plans. For us. Farmers markets on Saturdays. That new community garden project you mentioned. Maybe even that pottery class you've been talking about trying. The casual mention of future activities together, ordinary, everyday moments we might share, touched me deeply. This was what I'd been missing with Rachel and David. Not grand gestures or crisis management, but the simple assumption of continued presence in each other's lives. After Kate left, the house felt noticeably emptier, the silence more pronounced. I busied myself with small tasks, watering houseplants, sorting through a stack of mail that had accumulated during my hospital stay, preparing the guest room for David's children. The activity helped distract from the awareness of my own mortality that had lingered since my collapse in the garden. David arrived precisely at 3, as promised, all 3 boys tumbling from his SUV with the barely contained energy of young children released from confinement. Max, the youngest at 5, clutched his painted flower pot protectively. Henry, 7, carried a book about garden insects he wanted to show me. Will, the eldest at 9, immediately asked if he could check on the treehouse that Thomas had built in the backyard years ago. Boys, remember what we talked about, David reminded them as they entered the house. Grandma's been sick. Gentle movements, inside voices. Their attempts at restraint lasted approximately 5 minutes before nature reasserted itself, but their enthusiasm was infectious. Max presented his flower pot with solemn ceremony, explaining that the green pipe cleaner stems would last forever, not like real plants that die. Henry spread his insect book on the kitchen table, pointing out beetles he hoped to find in the garden. Will reported that the treehouse needed serious repairs, but he had a plan involving rope and the supplies in Grandpa's old tool shed. David watched them with a mixture of pride and mild exasperation, occasionally intervening when their energy threatened to overwhelm. I should have brought them one at a time, he apologized as Max accidentally knocked over a stack of magazines. This is probably too much after your heart. It's perfect, I interrupted, meaning it completely. The house has been too quiet. This is exactly what I needed. Something in my tone must have communicated my sincerity, because David's expression shifted from concern to relief. They've missed you, he said, helping Max gather the scattered magazines. I didn't realize how much until I mentioned coming over. They spent all morning deciding what to bring, what to show you. The admission carried an unspoken acknowledgement that in prioritizing his busy schedule, David had inadvertently limited his children's relationship with their grandmother. The awareness seemed to settle on him as he watched the boys explore the living room, rediscovering books and small treasures from previous visits. I've been thinking about what you said, he offered quietly, while the boys were momentarily occupied. About showing up, being present, I realized I've been approaching family like another item on my to-do list, something to schedule and complete rather than experience. The insight surprised me, both in its depth and in David's willingness to articulate it. My son had always been more action-oriented than introspective, more likely to offer solutions than engage in emotional analysis. That's a powerful realization, I acknowledged. Where did it come from? David's gaze followed his son's as they migrated toward the back door, eager to check on the garden and treehouse. Something Melissa said, actually, after I told her about our family meeting. He hesitated, then continued. She asked when I'd last spent time with you without checking my watch or phone, when I'd last really listened to what you were saying, rather than just waiting for my turn to speak. I couldn't remember. The admission hung between us, painful, but honest. And that bothered you, I observed. It did. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of Thomas when confronting an uncomfortable truth. It made me realize I've been doing the same thing with the boys, with Melissa. Always half present, half somewhere else. Always thinking about the next thing instead of the current moment. Before I could respond, Will called from the backyard, his voice pitched with excitement. Dad! Grandma! Come see what we found in the garden. David offered his arm to help me navigate the back steps. The simple gesture of support offered, without impatience or obligation, felt like a small miracle. As we made our way to the garden, I found myself hoping, cautiously, yes, but genuinely, that perhaps something valuable had emerged from my health crisis after all. The boys had discovered a family of rabbits nestled beneath the hydrangea bushes, a mother and 4 tiny kits, their fur still downy with infancy. We stood at a respectful distance, watching the small creatures twitch their noses cautiously at our presence. Can we keep them? Max whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. They're wild animals, David explained gently. They belong here in the garden, not in a house. But we can check on them when we visit Grandma. When we visit, Max repeated. Tomorrow? David looked at me, a question in his eyes. Not tomorrow, he said carefully. But soon, very soon, and often. The promise, simple as it was, carried weight beyond the moment. It wasn't just about rabbits or garden visits, but about prioritizing connection over convenience, presence over productivity. Whether David would maintain this new awareness remained to be seen, but the intention itself felt like a seedling pushing through soil. Fragile, yes, but alive with possibility. As the afternoon progressed into evening, I found myself observing my son and grandsons with new appreciation. The boys explored the garden with unreserved enthusiasm, asking questions about plants, discovering insects, planning improvements to the treehouse. David, rather than checking his phone or mentioning the time, engaged fully with their discoveries, occasionally glancing my way to include me in their shared excitement. The contrast with previous visits was striking. Usually, David arrived, with the boys already mentally calculating his departure, the visit itself a task to complete, rather than an experience to enjoy. Today, he moved at their pace, unhurried and attentive, as if the garden itself had cast a spell that suspended his normally relentless awareness of time. When Diane arrived as promised to check on me, she found us all on the back patio, the us all boys drawing elaborate plans for garden additions while David and I sorted through old seed packets. Well, this is a lovely surprise, she observed, setting down a container of homemade soup. I didn't realize you had company. The comment, innocent as it was, highlighted the abnormality of this ordinary family scene. That my son and grandsons visiting on a Saturday afternoon would be considered surprising rather than expected spoke volumes about how disconnected we'd become. David seemed to recognize this too, because he looked up from the seed packets with a slightly embarrassed smile. We should be here more often, he acknowledged. The boys love it, and clearly, Mom needs garden helpers now that she's supposed to be taking it easy. Indeed she does, Diane agreed, giving me a meaningful look. Eleanor's not very good at resting, even after a hard episode. Maybe you could help ensure she's following doctor's orders. "We will," Will announced seriously. "We'll come check." "On Grandma and the rabbits." Dad said so. "Did he now?" Diane smiled, catching my eye with raised eyebrows. "That's excellent news." Later, as David prepared to take the increasingly tired boys home, he hesitated at the front door. "I meant what I said, Mom, about visiting more often, about being more present." He glanced at his sons, now buckling themselves into the SUV. "They need this. I need this. We all do." I hugged him gently, mindful of my still healing heart. "One day at a time," I said. "That's all anyone can do." As their car disappeared down the street, Diane emerged from the kitchen where she'd been putting away the dinner dishes. "Well," she observed, "that was unexpected." "Yes," I agreed, still processing the day's events. "Very. Your family meeting must have been quite something," she remarked, settling onto the sofa. First, Rachel sends flowers. Now David spends an entire afternoon without checking his watch. Whatever you said certainly made an impression. "I simply told the truth," I replied, joining her in the living room. "That relationships are built on presence, not obligation. That actions speak louder than words or intentions." I smoothed a wrinkle in the sofa cushion. "And that my estate plan would reflect the reality of our relationships, not some idealized version of family harmony." Diane nodded, understanding immediately. "Nothing motivates like consequences," she observed. "Riley, even if the motivation starts from self-interest, it can evolve into something more genuine over time." "That's what I'm hoping," I admitted. "That these first steps, whatever prompted them, might lead to real connection if given enough time. And consistency." Diane stayed until dusk, helping me sort medication for the coming week and ensuring I had everything needed for my first night alone since the hospital. As she prepared to leave, she paused at the door. "Rachel called while you were in the garden with David and the boys. Said she'd try again tomorrow. Wanted to know if you needed anything from the store." The information settled like a warm stone in my chest. Another small gesture, insignificant in isolation but meaningful in context. "Thank you for letting me know." After Diane left, I moved slowly through the quiet house, turning on lamps against the gathering darkness. The day's events replayed in my mind: David's unexpected attentiveness, the boys' exuberance, Rachel's flowers and phone call. Small steps, tentative and potentially temporary, yet more than I'd experienced in years. My gaze fell on Thomas's photograph on the mantel, his kind eyes seeming to hold a question. "I know," I said aloud to the empty room. "It might not last. They might revert to old patterns once the shock wears off." I straightened the frame slightly. "But it's a beginning, and beginnings have power." As I prepared for bed that night, I felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through my chest. Not the tight warning pain of my coronary event, but something lighter, warmer. I recognized it, with some surprise, as hope. Not the desperate hope of wishful thinking, but the grounded hope that comes from seeing the first small evidence of possible change. My heart attack, minor coronary event, the doctors insisted on calling it, had forced a different kind of reckoning than I'd anticipated. Not just with my own mortality, but with the state of relationships I'd been silently mourning for years. In choosing to rewrite my will, I'd essentially rewritten the rules of engagement within my family, creating consequences for patterns too long accepted as inevitable. Whether these initial responses would deepen into genuine connection remained to be seen. People could change if motivated strongly enough, but lasting transformation required more than temporary adjustments made under duress. It required conscious choice, consistent effort, and a willingness to prioritize relationship over convenience, precisely what had been lacking in my interactions with Rachel and David for so long. As I drifted toward sleep, Thomas's favorite quote echoed in my mind. "People show you who they are through their actions. not their words or intentions. In the days and weeks to come, I would watch carefully to see who my children were choosing to be. Not just in moments of crisis or confrontation, but in the ordinary texture of everyday life. And I would hold firm to the truth that had emerged from my brush with mortality. That presence matters more than promises, and love is measured not in sentiment, but in showing up. 2 months had passed since my heart episode, the seasons shifting, from early spring to the fullness of summer. My garden had transformed alongside my life. Hydrangeas now in full, lush bloom, tomato plants heavy with ripening fruit, lavender buzzing with industrious bees. The cardiac rehabilitation program had strengthened my body while time had begun the more complex work of healing family fractures. Each week brought small changes, gradual shifts in patterns established over decades. Rachel's Wednesday dinners had become a steady fixture, arriving at 5:30 with Lily and James in tow. The first few visits had been stilted, conversation careful and surface level. Rachel moved through my kitchen with the precise efficiency that characterized her approach to life, setting the table with geometric precision, serving food with careful portioning, managing her children's behavior with quiet directives. Everything controlled, nothing spontaneous or messy. But children have a way of disrupting adult pretenses. By the third visit, James had knocked over a glass of milk. Lily had discovered my old collection of seashells, and the carefully orchestrated dinner had dissolved into something more authentic. Rachel's tight smile had gradually relaxed as she realized I wasn't judging her parenting, wasn't expecting perfection, was simply grateful for their presence. Last Wednesday had marked a subtle but significant shift. Rachel had arrived with ingredients rather than a prepared meal, announcing her plan to teach Lily how to make Thomas's famous apple crisp, a recipe I'd taught Rachel when she was barely tall enough to reach the counter. I realized, she'd explained, transferring apples from her grocery bag to my sink, that if I don't pass these traditions along, they'll disappear. James and Lily need to know these things about their grandfather, about our family. The acknowledgement that family history mattered, that continuity between generations was worth preserving, felt like a tiny miracle. As I watched Rachel guide Lily's small hands through the process of slicing apples and measuring cinnamon, I caught glimpses of the daughter I remembered from before. Ambition and achievement had consumed her attention. David's transformation had followed a different path. His initial weekend visit with the boys had expanded into regular Saturday afternoons. The treehouse renovation project had progressed from blueprint sketches to actual construction, with David and Will working steadily, while Henry cataloged garden insects and Max collected special rocks that now lined my windowsills. The activities themselves mattered less than the consistency. The simple fact of showing up, week after week, without cancellations or abbreviated visits. 3 weeks ago, David had arrived alone, leaving the boys with Melissa for the afternoon. We'd sat in the garden, sharing iced tea and comfortable silence, until David had finally broached the subject that was clearly on his mind. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, turning his glass between his hands, "about being present versus just physically showing up, about patterns and priorities." He hesitated, then continued. "I realized I've been doing exactly what Dad always warned against, confusing a busy life with a meaningful one." The insight had surprised me, not because it wasn't accurate, but because David had rarely demonstrated this kind of self-reflection. My middle child had always been a doer rather than a thinker, more comfortable with action than introspection. "I've made some changes," he continued. "Turned down a promotion that would have meant more travel. Restructured my work schedule to be home by 5 most days. Started actually using my vacation days instead of letting them expire." He glanced up, meeting my eyes directly. "It's not just about you, Mom. It's about the boys, about Melissa, about not waking up 20 years from now wondering where the time went." The conversation had shifted something between us, creating space for a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation, on shared values rather than mere family connection. Kate's transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic, though in her case, it wasn't about changing patterns of neglect, but about deepening an already strong connection. Her plans to relocate to Portland had accelerated after a lengthy discussion with her girlfriend Julia during a weekend visit. They'd found a small craftsman bungalow just 15 minutes from my house, close enough for regular visits but far enough to maintain independent lives. "It feels right," Kate had explained as we toured the property together. "Not just because of your health scare, though that was certainly a catalyst, but because this is home, in a way Seattle never quite managed to be." The move was scheduled for next month, coinciding with Julia's transfer to her company's Portland office. Already, they'd begun integrating themselves into my life more fully, joining the occasional Wednesday dinner with Rachel's family, helping with the Saturday treehouse project, accompanying me to doctor's appointments when schedules permitted. On this particular morning, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing the final paperwork Martin had prepared. The revised will and estate plan lay before me, amended once more to reflect the evolving reality of my family relationships. Rachel and David were now included, though in a more modest capacity than the original equal three-way split. The grandchildren's educational trusts remained, as did provisions for the community programs that had sustained me after Thomas's death. Most significantly, the documentation included detailed explanations for these decisions. Not legally necessary, but emotionally important, ensuring my children understood that these adjustments reflected observed changes rather than capitulation to pressure. Martin had suggested this approach during our meeting last week. "They've demonstrated genuine effort," he'd observed. "Not just temporary appeasement, but actual behavioral change. That deserves recognition." I'd agreed, though with clear caveats, but not complete restoration. The damage of years can't be undone in months. The doorbell interrupted my contemplation, a familiar pattern of rings that announced Diane's arrival. I welcomed her with a warm hug, noting the canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder that undoubtedly contained fresh offerings from the farmer's market. "Perfect timing," I greeted her. "I've just finished reviewing the updated documents." "And?" Diane inquired, placing her market finds on the counter. Early peaches, fresh herbs, a loaf of artisan bread still warm from the oven. "Have you made peace with the changes?" I nodded, returning to the table. "I think so. It feels balanced, acknowledging their efforts without erasing the history that led us here." I tapped the folder thoughtfully. "The most important thing is that I'm making this decision from a place of clarity, not sentimentality or manipulation." "That's what matters," Diane agreed, filling the kettle for tea. "These past few months have been quite the journey for all of you." "Indeed," I acknowledged, "though not one I would have chosen voluntarily." Diane chuckled softly. "The most transformative journeys rarely are." She settled into the chair opposite me, her expression growing more serious. "Have you told them about the test results?" The question touched on the subject I'd been carefully avoiding in recent family gatherings. 3 weeks ago, my follow-up appointment had revealed a new concern, an abnormality that required additional testing, the results of which had arrived yesterday. "Not yet," I admitted. "I wanted to finish this first." I gestured to the estate documents. "To make these decisions based on what they've demonstrated, not out of reaction to new medical information." Diane nodded, understanding immediately. "That makes sense. When will you tell them?" "Soon. I've asked all 3 to come. For dinner this Sunday." I attempted a smile that didn't quite reach its mark. Another family meeting, though hopefully less dramatic than the last. The kettle whistled, its sharp cry interrupting our conversation. As Diane prepared tea, I found myself gazing out the kitchen window at the garden Thomas and I had cultivated for decades. The redbud tree he'd planted on our 20th anniversary now stood tall and majestic, its canopy providing shade for the perennial bed below. So many seasons, so many cycles of growth and dormancy, death and renewal. Eleanor? Diane's voice drew me back from my contemplation. She placed a steaming mug before me, concern evident in her expression. "Where did you go just now?" "Just thinking about time," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. "How it changes everything, whether we're ready or not." Diane's gaze was knowing. "The test results weren't good, were they?" I shook my head slightly. "Not catastrophic, but not what we'd hoped. The blockage is more extensive than they initially thought. They're recommending surgery, not immediately, but soon, within the month." "Bypass?" "Yes. Triple, possibly quadruple, depending on what they find once they're in there." I sipped my tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. "The recovery will be significant, 6 to 8 weeks minimum, with assistance needed for much of that time." Diane reached across the table to cover my hand with hers. "You know you don't have to face this alone. The book club, the neighborhood committee, we're all here. And now your children too, it seems." "That's actually what I've been thinking about most," I admitted. "This will be the real test, won't it? These past months, they've been present when it was relatively convenient, when the demands were minimal. But surgery, recovery, that's a different level of commitment." "Do you doubt they'll step up?" I considered this carefully, weighing the evidence of recent months against decades of established patterns. "I'm cautiously optimistic about Kate. She's proven herself consistently. Rachel and David. I'm less certain. Old habits reassert themselves under pressure." "People can surprise you," Diane offered. "Sometimes crisis reveals strength no one knew existed. And sometimes it confirms exactly what you already suspected," I countered, though without bitterness. "Either way, I'll know the truth soon. Enough." Our conversation shifted to more pleasant topics: the community garden project, the book club's upcoming author event, Diane's new granddaughter whose photos she proudly displayed on her phone. The morning passed comfortably, as it often did in Diane's company, her friendship a steady constant amid the shifting landscape of my family relationships. After she left, I returned to the estate documents, signing where Martin had indicated. The decisions felt right, measured responses to demonstrated changes, neither overly punitive nor naively optimistic. Whatever happened next, I had created a framework that reflected reality rather than wishful thinking. Sunday arrived with perfect summer weather, clear blue skies, gentle breezes, temperatures warm without being oppressive. I spent the morning preparing for dinner, moving at the careful pace my cardiac rehabilitation team had recommended. Simple tasks now required planning and patience. Marinating chicken breasts for grilling, preparing a salad with vegetables from my garden, setting the patio table under the shade of the redbud tree. Kate and Julia arrived first, bearing flowers and a chilled bottle of sparkling cider. "No wine until you're off those medications," Kate reminded me, pressing a kiss to my cheek. "Doctor's orders." Julia, still somewhat new to these family gatherings, brought a homemade cheesecake. "My grandmother's recipe," she explained, placing it carefully in the refrigerator. "Kate mentioned it was your favorite." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me. In the month since my heart episode, Julia had gradually shifted from Kate's distant partner to a welcome presence in her own right, observant, gentle, with a quiet humor that emerged once she felt comfortable. She reminded me a bit of Thomas, in her steadiness, her ability to observe without immediate judgment. Rachel arrived next, uncharacteristically without Jason, who was apparently attending a work conference in Chicago. Lily and James bounded into the backyard, immediately gravitating to the treehouse where their cousins would soon join them. Rachel carried a folder alongside her contribution to dinner, roasted vegetables that, from their precise uniformity, had clearly been prepared with her usual attention to detail. "For you," she said, handing me the folder after setting down the vegetable dish. "I've been researching some options for updating your estate plan. These are just some preliminary thoughts. We can discuss them after dinner if you'd like." The folder contained printouts about various trusts and tax strategies, each page annotated in Rachel's neat handwriting. I thanked her, setting it aside. Without comment, noting the flash of disappointment that crossed her face. Old patterns never disappear entirely, I reminded myself. Rachel's approach to family would always involve some element of management and control. David and his family completed our gathering, arriving in their usual whirlwind of activity. The boys immediately joined their cousins in the treehouse, while Melissa, a quiet, capable woman I'd never quite managed to know well, offered to help finish dinner preparations. David carried a toolbox alongside a bottle of iced tea, explaining with a grin that he'd noticed the garden gate hinge needed repair. "Can't have you climbing ladders or using power tools yet," he said, setting down his offerings. "I thought I'd take care of it while the kids play." The simple thoughtfulness of the gesture, noticing a household need and offering to address it without being asked, represented precisely the kind of attention that had been missing in our relationship for so long. Not grand declarations of devotion, but practical care expressed through consistent presence. Dinner unfolded pleasantly beneath the redbud tree, conversation flowing between family updates and community news. The children ate quickly before returning to their play, their voices carrying across the garden in bursts of laughter and occasional disagreement. The adults lingered over dessert, Julia's cheesecake meeting with unanimous approval, until the angle of the sun indicated early evening's approach. As Melissa gathered the children for departure, I finally broached the subject that had been waiting all afternoon. "Before everyone leaves, there's something I need to discuss. A family matter." The phrase immediately captured their attention, echoing as it did my words from that fateful meeting months ago. Rachel straightened in her chair. David's expression grew watchful, and Kate's hand found mine beneath the table, offering silent support. "First," I began, "I want to acknowledge the changes these past months have brought. Your presence in my life has been meaningful, and I'm grateful for it." I nodded toward the folder Martin had prepared, which I'd brought outside after dinner. "That's reflected in the updated estate plan I've just finalized." Rachel's expression brightened slightly, though she maintained careful composure. David simply nodded, his eyes showing more concern for me than interest in the documents. Kate squeezed my hand gently, encouraging me to continue. "But that's not why I asked you all to be here today," I continued. "I received some medical news last week that we need to discuss." The words hung in the summer air, heavy with implication. I explained the situation as directly as possible. The more extensive blockage, the recommended surgery, the significant recovery period ahead. As I spoke, I watched their reactions carefully, searching for the truth beneath the surface responses. Rachel immediately shifted into problem-solving mode, her mind visibly working through logistical considerations. "We'll need to create a schedule," she said, pulling out her phone to access her calendar. "I can take the week of the surgery itself. I'll shift some court dates. Jason's mother could help with the kids when needed." David nodded agreement. "The boys and I will handle the yard work and house maintenance. No need to worry about any of that. And Melissa's sister is a nurse. She might have some insights about home recovery that could be helpful." Their responses were immediate, practical, focused on external arrangements rather than emotional support. Exactly what I might have expected, yet somehow more genuine than similar offers would have been before my heart episode. There was an undercurrent of true concern beneath the efficiency, a desire to help, even if expressed through practical action rather than emotional connection. Kate's response was more direct. "Julia and I will accelerate our moving timeline," she said simply. "We can be here within 2 weeks before the surgery." That way I can coordinate everything and be here consistently during early recovery." Julia nodded agreement, her quiet presence a steady support to Kate's more vocal commitment. "My company is already expecting the transfer," she added. "We'll make it work." The conversation continued, plans taking shape with surprising cooperation. Between my normally independent children, Rachel suggested converting the downstairs study into a temporary bedroom to avoid stairs during recovery. David offered to research hospital bed rentals and other medical equipment that might be needed. Kate began coordinating with Diane about involving the broader community support network I'd cultivated over the years. As I watched them work together, Rachel's organizational skills, David's practical approach, Kate's emotional intelligence, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in who they were becoming, perhaps. Hope for what our family might yet evolve into. Cautious optimism that this crisis might further strengthen the tentative bonds that had begun forming since my heart episode. Yet beneath these positive feelings lay an undercurrent of realism. One dinner, one crisis response, couldn't erase decades of established patterns. Recovery would be lengthy, demanding, at times undoubtedly frustrating for everyone involved. The true test would come not in these initial plans, but in the day-to-day reality of sustained care and attention. When the conversation eventually wound down, practical matters addressed as thoroughly as possible for the moment, a natural lull fell over our gathering. The long summer twilight had begun, casting the garden in golden light. The children had exhausted themselves with play and now sprawled on the lawn, examining insects and cloud formations with equal fascination. "I have something to say as well," Rachel announced unexpectedly, setting down her phone. "I've been offered a partnership position at the firm." "Congratulations," sprang automatically to my lips, but Rachel raised her hand slightly, stopping me. "I haven't accepted yet," she continued, surprising me further. "It would mean more hours, more responsibility, less flexibility." She glanced toward Lily and James, then back to me. "I'm considering declining it." The statement hung in the air, its significance apparent to everyone who knew Rachel's ambitious career trajectory. For 20 years, partnership had been her singular professional goal, the benchmark against which she measured her success and worth. "That's unexpected," I finally said, choosing my words carefully. "May I ask why?" Rachel's gaze dropped to her hands, manicured nails tapping lightly against the patio table. "These past few months have been clarifying in ways I didn't anticipate. Seeing you in that hospital bed, realizing how little I knew about your daily life, how absent I'd been." She paused, composing herself. "I don't want Lily and James to have those same realizations someday. I don't want to miss what matters because I was too busy chasing the next achievement." The admission, vulnerable, honest, deeply personal, caught me off guard. Rachel had always maintained careful emotional boundaries, presenting a polished exterior that revealed little of her inner landscape. This glimpse behind the facade felt like a precious gift, a sign of trust I hadn't fully earned back yet. "Whatever you decide," I said gently, "make the choice that aligns with your values, not just your goals. That's something your father tried, to teach all of you, the difference between achievement and fulfillment." Rachel nodded, a slight smile lifting the corners of her mouth. "I remember. I just wasn't ready to hear it then." The evening concluded naturally after that, families gathering children and belongings, departures staggered but unhurried. Promises were made, phone calls to arrange, research to conduct, details to coordinate regarding the upcoming surgery. Kate and Julia stayed longest, helping restore the kitchen to order before reluctantly departing with assurances of returning tomorrow. Alone in the quiet house, I moved through my evening routine with measured care. Medication, gentle stretches, the cup of herbal tea that had replaced my former glass of evening wine. The day's events replayed in my mind as I prepared for sleep, each moment examined for its deeper meaning. My children had responded to the news of my surgery with immediate commitment, practical solutions, cooperative planning. They had demonstrated presence, attention, genuine concern. All positive signs, certainly. Yet the true measure would come in the weeks ahead, in showing up consistently even when inconvenient, in maintaining attention even when other priorities pressed, in demonstrating the steady care that constitutes genuine love in action. As I settled beneath the light summer quilt, my gaze fell on Thomas's photograph on the bedside table. His kind eyes seemed to hold the same mixture of hope and caution I felt myself, belief in possibility tempered by lived experience, optimism balanced with realism. "We'll see," I murmured to his image. "They're trying. That counts for something." Morning arrived with golden clarity, sunlight streaming through east-facing windows to illuminate the quiet house. I made my way carefully downstairs, following the doctor-approved regimen that had become routine since my heart episode. The medication lineup on the kitchen counter, organized by Kate into labeled daily compartments, reminded me of my new reality, one defined by cardiac care and careful monitoring. As I prepared morning tea, the sound of a car in the driveway caught my attention. A glance at the clock, barely 7:30, triggered momentary concern. No one in my family tended toward early morning visits, and my medical appointments were meticulously recorded on the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. Rachel appeared at the kitchen door moments later, still dressed in running clothes, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that revealed features strikingly similar to those I saw in the mirror decades ago. She seemed surprised to find me already up and moving about the kitchen. "Mom," she greeted me, slightly breathless. "I hope it's not too early. I was out for my morning run and realized I was nearby, so—" She hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic uncertainty. "I thought maybe we could have breakfast together, if you haven't eaten yet." The spontaneity of the gesture, so unlike Rachel's carefully scheduled approach to life, touched me deeply. "I'd like that very much," I replied, hiding my surprise behind a warm smile. "I was just making tea." Rachel moved through my kitchen with growing familiarity, retrieving eggs from the refrigerator, bread from the box, fresh berries I'd purchased at yesterday's farmer's market. As she worked, she spoke, not about schedules or arrangements for my upcoming surgery, but about Lily's recent fascination with astronomy, James's struggles with piano practice, Jason's consideration of a career, change that would involve less travel. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences as we prepared a simple breakfast together. When we finally settled at the kitchen table, food before us and tea steaming in our cups, Rachel hesitated again, her expression growing more serious. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she began, "about aligning choices with values, not just goals. It's made me realize how much I've been operating on autopilot, pursuing the next promotion, the next achievement, without questioning whether it's taking me where I actually want to go." I listened quietly, allowing her the space to articulate thoughts that were clearly still forming. "The partnership decision is just a symptom of something larger," she continued, her gaze fixed on her teacup. "I've been measuring success by external benchmarks, salary, title, recognition. Even with Lily and James, I've focused on their achievements, rather than their happiness." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I don't want to wake up 20 years from now and realize I've created exactly the same distance with them that I created with you." The vulnerability in her admission, the acknowledgement of patterns she recognized but hadn't yet fully addressed, felt like a precious gift, more valuable than any practical assistance she might offer during my recovery. "Awareness is the first step," I offered gently. "You can't change what you don't acknowledge." Rachel nodded, a small smile lifting the corners of her mouth. "That sounds like something Dad would say." "He did say it many times," I confirmed, returning her smile. "Usually when one of you was refusing to admit a mistake." The observation triggered a soft laugh from Rachel, a sound I'd heard too rarely in recent years. He was right about so many things. I just wasn't ready to hear them then. We finished breakfast in companionable silence, the morning light strengthening as it filled the kitchen. When Rachel finally rose to leave, "Early meeting I can't reschedule," she explained. Apologetically, she paused at the door, her expression thoughtful. "When you were in the hospital," she said carefully, "and none of us showed up right away. How did that feel?" The question, direct and unvarnished, caught me off guard. Rachel had always avoided emotional inquiries, preferring practical discussions with clear solutions. This venture into the territory of feelings represented a significant departure from her usual approach. It felt. I considered my words carefully, wanting to honor the courage her question represented. It felt like confirmation of something I'd known but hadn't wanted to accept. That I'd become peripheral in your lives, an obligation rather than a relationship. I paused, then added gently, "It hurt, Rachel. Not just my heart, but something deeper." She nodded, absorbing this with a steadiness that surprised me. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Not just for that day, but for all the days before it." The gradual distance that became so normal, I stopped noticing it. "Thank you," I replied, equally simple in my response. "That matters." After Rachel left, I carried our breakfast dishes to the sink, moving slowly through the cleaning process as my mind processed what had just occurred. The unexpected visit, the genuine conversation, the direct question about emotional impact, all represented significant departure from Rachel's established patterns. One breakfast couldn't erase years of distance, of course. One vulnerable conversation didn't guarantee lasting change. But as I dried the last teacup and returned it to its cabinet, I felt something I hadn't fully allowed myself to experience until now. Hope. Not the desperate hope of wishful thinking, but the grounded hope that emerges from tangible evidence of possible transformation. My phone chimed with an incoming text message. David, confirming he'd pick me up for next week's pre-surgical consultation. A simple practical gesture, yet meaningful in its reliability. Another chime followed. Kate, updating me on their accelerated moving plans, now scheduled for completion before my surgery date. A third notification appeared. Diane, confirming the book club's meal rotation schedule during my recovery period. As I reviewed these messages, standing in the kitchen where generations of my family had gathered through joy and grief, celebration and crisis, I felt a strange sense of completion. The heart episode that had begun this journey, frightening, painful, unwelcome, had ultimately created space for necessary truths, for long overdue reckonings, for the possibility of relationships based on reality rather than obligation or idealization. Whatever came next, the surgery with its risks and limitations, the recovery with its challenges and frustrations, I would face it surrounded by a circle of care built on clearer understanding. Some from my children, whose efforts toward genuine presence had begun showing consistency. Some from friends like Diane, whose steady support had sustained me through the initial crisis. Some from the broader community I'd carefully cultivated since Thomas's death. The heart that had faltered in my garden months ago, muscle and valve, arteries and chambers, would soon undergo surgical intervention, skilled hands working to extend its functioning. But the heart that truly mattered, the symbolic center of connection and meaning, of love given and received, had already experienced a different kind of healing. Not complete, not perfect, but genuine in its progress. As morning sunlight filled my kitchen, illuminating decades of memories embedded in every surface, I felt an unexpected peace settle over me. The path forward remained uncertain, the sustainability of recent changes unproven. Yet in this moment, standing in the house where I'd raised my family, surrounded by evidence of care both old and new, I allowed myself to believe that sometimes, even late in life, broken patterns can be mended and distant hearts can find their way home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.